Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I know it's been a while since I've actually posted a particular video on my YouTube channel, and I'm mainly focused on Islamic materials that I find have enriched me and brought me closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And now, what I hope after this Ramadan of 2018, I've decided that I'm going to keep this account a little bit more active, inshallah ta'ala. And what I'm going to do is start off with a series of stories. Some are fictional, some are not fictional, and they are real, and you'll be surprised at some of the stories that I'm going to say, inshallah ta'ala. You'll be thinking that these are actually fictional, it's just beyond mind belief. And some are historical, some are based, some are historical, sorry, I got distracted there. Some are historical, some are from history and true events that have happened in history. Some are about particular characters in Islamic history, and just anecdotes and little fables and stuff like that. The idea is that there's a hadith by the Prophet ﷺ that, just to summarize it, Prophet ﷺ said to the Sahabi, Sa'a wa Sa'a. Basically, the Sahabas asked the Messenger of Allah that when we're with you, we feel our iman is high, so we feel close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then when you leave us, our iman goes low and we feel a little bit far religiously and spiritually. And so Prophet ﷺ said, you've got to give your body time for rest, and there's time for spirituality. So you can. And so the idea was that I keep the YouTube channel a little bit open, so it's not just specifically just information. Although it's great, but obviously you need to kind of change the mood a little bit. And so inshallah, we're starting off a series of stories, and for you to be up to date and to catch them, you need to hit that subscribe button, hit the share if you like the story. If you don't like the story, just share it and just tell the people to watch it. Just if you don't like them, and you think the story is silly, just hit the share. And what else? There's share, like. Yeah, you just hit the like. If you don't like it, just don't hit that. Just leave that button wherever it's here. Just don't hit that. If you don't like it, go in the comments, say I didn't like it because this. Because this way you'll be helping me grow, and for you to actually be up to date with the stories and to know, just hit that subscribe button. And then there's a little bell there. If you hit it, then at least you'll be notified of when I upload the story. Inshallah, there'll be at least 1 or 2 stories a week, at the very least, inshallah ta'ala. I'll try to squeeze in more, inshallah, but obviously it will depend on the time producing it, filming it, producing, uploading, writing. It is a bit of a fact involved for it. The whole purpose, there's no purpose but to share with you a little bit of these stories. Starting with now. I'm going to share with you a little story. Now, it is presented as though it is a true story, right? I naturally am quite skeptical of things, so I'll just take the story face value. I can deduce what I can deduce and see if it enriches my life, but if not, it's for its entertainment value, I think it's worth it. Okay, so here's a story about a man who had 3 sons. These 3 sons, I don't know, through lack of creativity or lack of names being present, he called the first one Abdullah, the second one Abdullah, and the third one Abdullah. Which, okay, it's not bad, it's good, it's one of the good names. He was a slave of Allah, obviously that's brilliant. But to name all 3 of them, I don't know how did he aim to distinguish between them. The thing is, he raised them very well, and he looked after them, and he gave them all the knowledge, and he shared with them, and he really taught them, really educated them to the best of his abilities. Did they not question the names? Did they not change it? They could just get a deed poll and, I don't know, change the names, I don't know. But anyways, they just continued. But then came the deathbed, when the man was in his deathbed, last moment, he said his last final words. And his last final words were, Abdullah inherits, Abdullah inherits, Abdullah doesn't inherit. And as if he stopped there, but they wanted to know which Abdullah doesn't inherit. He just said 2 out of the 3 Abdullahs inherit, 1 doesn't. And as they were asking, he just died. Now, this caused a dilemma. It's quite big for them. They all wanted to be fair and just, and they didn't want to take the right of somebody else. And if their father said one of them don't inherit, then they wanted to honor that, all three of them collectively. So they wanted to get to the bottom of this. Not knowing what to do, they said, you know what, we've only got one option, and that option is just to go to the judge who is in the next town and just present him our case, and hopefully he'll be able to help us. And they felt really quite encouraged about it. They said they prepared for the trip, and they headed towards that town to reach the judge. On their way, so the story is based in very old times, right? So they had to walk on the treacherous terrain of a desert just to go to the next town, right? So on this desert, they came across a shepherd. Now this shepherd had approached them very frantic and very worried, in a sense of like haze a little bit, and they asked him, what's wrong with you? He responded back and he said to him, listen, I've lost a sheep of mine. Would you have seen it coming from where you are? Would you have seen a sheep that's just a stray sheep that is lost? Sorry. So one of them turned back to the guy and he said, would your sheep be blind from one eye? And he said, yes. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, definitely. I mean, how many sheep are blind from one eye? I mean, this must be it. He said, okay. And then the second one asked, does your sheep have no tail? Yeah! Fantastic, that's it. Yeah. Have you seen it? And then the third one jumped in and he said to him, does your sheep limp more on one side than another side? Yeah, absolutely. But I got excited for the man. I know the story, and I'm excited. Yeah! Anyway, so yeah, he got really happy and he was like, yeah, what happened? Have you seen it? Is it that way? They said, your sheep. He said, yeah. We haven't seen it. That moment, the guy just was driven crazy. Like, what do you mean you described it like you were there? You must have held it. You must have looked at it to describe it so vividly. No, we haven't seen it. You guys are thieves. So he turned on them and he switched on them. You guys are thieves. You guys stole my sheep. You guys, and he started barraging them and showered them with abuse. And he said, I'm going to take you all and I'm going to complain to the judge. He's just there. I'm going to complain to you all and he will get my right from you. And they said, you know what? We're actually on our way to the judge. You can join us and then we can go together. Shocked at that proposition, he obliged him, of course. So then they continued the journey. Now one of them, like the shepherd, doesn't trust the three people whom he's with. But anyways, so they headed towards the judge and then they sat before the judge and the judge said, what's your story? Before the three Abdullahs can speak anything, the shepherd jumped up and he said, listen, I've got a sheep who's got lost. These three have seen it and they deny seeing it, and they've described it so well. I know they took it. I know they've done something to it. Probably killed it and ate it, but I still want my right. They took something that doesn't belong to them. It belongs to me. They stole my sheep. The judge, obviously, being a just judge, he had to ask for their side of the story. Can't just take one side of the story. Remember that. To be a just person, you really need to take both sides of the story. Don't start with prejudging people, right? So in this case, the judge turned to the three people, and the three Abdullahs, and he said to them, okay, so you've been accused by stealing this sheep. You've described the sheep so vividly. You must have seen the sheep. I mean, all evidence points towards you being guilty of it. How do you have any words in your defense? And they said, okay, you say we described it vividly, but let me tell you how we came to the conclusions that we came to. So when we asked the person, the shepherd, if it was blind from one eye, right, this was very simple. As we were walking on this desert, we saw little shrubs, little plants along the way. It would be a nice round if it wasn't touched, but when it was eaten from one side over another, then we deduced that this must be a sheep that was blind from one eye And when it ate from the side that it can see, not the other side. And so as we were walking, we just see shrubs eaten from one side, and we saw that's definitely done by a sheep that can only see from one eye. At this point, the judge was very convinced with the argument. He said, yeah, that makes a lot of sense and could explain that, but having said that, it doesn't explain the other two descriptions. And so the second one stood up and he said, well, it's easy. On our path, we saw, oh God, how am I going to say this without being too rude? All right, feces. I said it right. So a sheep feces. They kind of they look like little balls. I don't know, it might put you off olive oil or black olives, but it's something that's really tiny, small, and they come in like little pellet type sizes, right? And when it drops it kind of drops it as a trail, especially after it's just eaten, right? And what would happen is that, well, this is them explaining it. On our way towards this region, we saw bulks of these sheep poo or feces in piles. If the sheep actually had a tail, tails tend to just waggle, and when they waggle or wag, one of them, right, it tends to disperse the feces pellets or poo, right? So they tend to move about, so it'll be a little bit more of a scattered distribution of it rather than piled up feces. Very convinced with this argument. Yeah, it makes sense. So in this case, clearly the sheep didn't have any tail, otherwise it would have dispersed it, but in this case, not having it meant that the poo would come up in clumps and be quite obvious that it wasn't dispersed. And they said, okay, that makes sense. Okay, but that doesn't explain how can you tell that a sheep is limping. To describe it in that manner would mean that you've actually seen it. You would have seen it limp. And the third one said, no, it's actually quite easy. As we were walking, you can see the trail and the trace, or the footsteps or hoof steps of the sheep, right? And then when you see it, you can see that the sheep digs in more into the sand on one side over another. And so naturally your good or healthier legs take more of the weight, and so it will be ever so slightly deeper than the other side. And so we thought, or we deduced that it was actually a limping sheep. And at that stage, all four of them, Judge and the three, turned back to that shepherd and go, have you got any leg to stand on? Pardon the pun. And everybody was flabbergasted. They all saw that, yeah, all these explanations makes a lot of sense, and clearly there was some misunderstanding that had happened. So the guy just went off on his way. So the judge turned back to the three people, the three Abdullahs, and he said, what is your story? So they turned back to the judge and they said to the judge, okay, this is our story. Our dad called us all Abdullah. We lived and we didn't go out questionnaire, and then comes towards his death. He turns back and says, one of us doesn't inherit. So clearly there's something that he knows that we don't know, and we came for you to ask if you can sort this out. Can you tell us which of the three of us does not inherit from our dad? He was quite tired, and he came towards the end of the evening, or the shift per se, so he said, okay, this is quite a tricky situation, and so can I ask you all to spend the night over in my house, and I will provide a servant to look after you all. He will sort out everything for you, clear and get the beds ready for you all, get food for you all, and then when it comes to the morning, we'll sit down and we'll discuss your situation. And they said, okay, fair enough, it has been a long day, let's just relax over. They went to their rooms, the servant joined them, and he brought over their beddings and sorted and cleaned the room and sorted it all out for them. And as he sat there, when he was a little bit distracted, one of the three Abdullahs turned back to the other two brothers and he said to them, I know for sure that this judge actually sent that servant not to help us and look after us over the night, but that servant is there as a spy, and so we've got to be really careful about what we say, and we've just got to be sticking to the point. It's the sort of things like how you'd have modern day informants. They'll promise a prisoner earlier release or parole if he or she snitches on the people in prison, so he's got a bit of more inside information. He'd probably be able to expose them a little bit quicker, something like that. So in this case, the servant was there listening. They knew that, so they had to make sure that whatever they say in that room or in the conversation is only factual, and potentially they could be asked about it. So they've really got to make sure that they're not lying or saying anything wrong that could allow the judge to misjudge them or have a preconception about their integrity. Yeah, I know, big words, isn't it? Right. So the servant came over. He brought them some rice and some meat, and they sat down. One of them, the three brothers, looked at the food, turned to his brothers, and he said to them, "Don't eat. The judge just served us dog meat instead of lamb." So they stopped eating, and then they looked a little bit dismayed at their servant. He's the one who brought this food over. Then one of them turned back to the table, or well, the floor where all the food was, and he looked at the food, and then he looked at the bread. And there's something peculiar about the bread, and he turned to them and he said, "This bread was actually baked by a pregnant lady who was pregnant in her 9th month." Like, look at the detail. I mean, this is way before ultrasounds have arrived, yet alone knowing that she's pregnant just from baked bread. And then the third one turned back to his friends just randomly, and he just goes to them, "You know what? I know for sure that judge was an illegitimate child. Definitely, for sure, he's an illegitimate child." And the servant heard those three things, and he just rushed out, and he had to report back to the judge, and he said to them, "This is what they said, this is what they said, and that's what they said, and this is how they were in the room." So he gave them a lowdown. He just gave them an update on everything he saw or heard in that room. So the judge was dismayed and was rather angry at what he heard. He tried his best to be as hospitable as possible, and yet they responded that way. So he thought, okay, let me just double check all of this information, whatever they said. So he went to the chef and asked him, "What have you served my guests?" Just randomly, in a judge, inspector kind of investigative tone. The chef turned back and he said to him, "Listen, you come to me towards the end of my shift, you come to me towards the end of the day, and you asked me to prepare a sheep. We've got nothing left, and the first thing I caught was this frail dog that I just found stray in the desert. Nobody's going to ask for it, and I slaughtered it for your guests." And at that point the judge was like really dismayed, like, "Why did you do that?" "No, I had to serve your guests something, so this is the only thing I had." Then he asked in the kitchens, like, "Who did the bread?" At this time now he's getting all inquisitive now, like, so "Who did the bread?" And they turned back and they said, "It's so and so." He goes, Who can you describe her a little bit for me?" And they said, "Yeah, she's a pregnant lady. She's like due for maternity. Like, she's in her 9th month. She could just go into labour at any moment now. So she's the one who did it. If you've got any problem with the bread, I'm sorry. She's the only one who was there, and she's pregnant. So what can we do?" So at this point, the judge was a little bit confused. Like, how? If I didn't know it was dog meat and my chef would do that, or this lady was pregnant, how did they know it? And so the third question, or the third statement, that's the one that really got his brain thinking. So he rushed to his mum and he said to her, "Mum, I ask you by Allah Almighty, I ask you, am I your son?" She turned back to him and she said, "No." Either she said, "No, I'm your stepmom," or like out of marriage mum, or the father isn't his father, basically. So either way, just an illegitimate child out of wed. So his parents weren't married. By this time, the judge was just all dismayed. He was all crazy, and he just could not believe what he had just heard. And so he couldn't wait till the morning come just to ask them about all of these things. So he just retired for the day. Comes the morning, and he brings them all in front of him, and then he sits them before his court, and he says to them, and he said, "Okay, I don't know if he said I think he said, okay, we will come to the bottom of your case today, but I've got 3 questions for you all. And the first one is, you all say that you have had dog meat. How could you tell it was dog meat? I had to actually ask the chef what did he serve, so I was a bit concerned. How would you have distinguished between dog meat and lamb?" And so one of them said that it's very easy. When you come to eat the lamb, and I apologise for all my vegetarian viewers, right? We eat a lamb, it will be a skin, then you'll see a fatty layer, then you'll see the meat, or like meat, it's actually muscles, but you see the muscle, and then the bone. And this is the normal scenario, so we just thought, okay, it's going to be a lamb or a sheep or something or a goat in that kind of caliber, or in that, if it was in that, and so if the food or the meat served was in that order, then he would have ate from it. But in this case, what they found and what they were served was actually dog meat, because according to the person explaining to the judge, and he said, okay, but what we saw in this situation was you had the bone, then you had the fatty layer, then the muscles, then the skin. And so this is how I deduced it was actually dog meat, not lamb or sheep or goat or whatever it was, right? So this is how we found out. So again, here the judge was very convinced with the answer and seemed that he made sense, and so brilliant. So here's one, but how can they tell how far into a pregnancy a lady is? This was the shocker of all of them for them. And they said to him, well, it's clear, well, the second one just picked up, he said, if you had looked at the bread, what would happen is that it was more done in one side and almost not done on the other side, and so it was more fluffier and bigger and nicely done from one side, but the other side needed a little bit longer just for it to bake and for you to get that full bread experience. But in this situation, all the breads were uniformly not baked properly. It was more done on one side than the other, and so from that I deduced that it must have been hard for the lady who was baking, for her to reach her hand and allow her to bake the breads properly. She wasn't able to stretch out. Belly must have been big. It must have been in 9th month. That kind of hindered her movement, and so from that, based on this half well baked and half unbaked bread, they were able to deduce that, yeah, definitely this was done by a pregnant lady. Then, so bear in mind that he's asking them things that basically he knew straight from the servant. The servant said all of this thing. And again, do you remember when they first when they first went to that room or the place that they were going to stay overnight? they did say that this servant is there to spy on us, so they deduced that very well. But then they did. And so the judge asked them, okay, so you guessed about the dog meat, and obviously it's unintentional, and you knew about the pregnant lady. Now, can you tell me what made you say what you said about me when you actually attacked my parents' honor? At that moment, and then the last one said, well, listen, that was quite easy. Only an illegitimate child, somebody who had some lacking in the growing up and was brought up very badly or not nicely, that he or she will send somebody as a spy over innocent people. So clearly he must be an illegitimate child. I don't know, it seemed like more of him attacking him. It sounded like an attack on that judge. It seemed to belittle the judge a little bit. But he said it. I mean, I lost that tone and I lost that eloquence when he's saying it in Arabic, and it doesn't come across as a very cursy way, but it did come out in a semi-offensive manner. And the judge didn't react to that because now he knows it's true, and so he just accepted that. And at that point he said, well, okay, I'm ready to help you all with your issue. You, Mr. Dogmeat Discoverer, you are definitely the son of your dad. Then he went to the other brother and he said, you, Mr. Ultrasound Pregnancy Unit, you definitely inherit from your dad because you're the son of your dad. And as for you, the last one, the one who called him an illegitimate child, you don't inherit. And I said, why? Because clearly, according to your dad, what he said, you're actually an illegitimate child, and so you do not get any of the inheritance because you're not a blood brother or a blood son to this guy. That's it. Really, that's where the story's ended, really. Again, I don't know how true it is. And I'm sure some people will go and check out this kind of layering of the dog versus lamb. And I'm sure some of you are going to go and try to look it up. I tried to look up and I didn't find much out there about the anatomy of the dog's leg or the layers of it, but what I did come across is that there's a lot of muscle directly under the skin, and so it kind of makes sense that it could be true. But either way, we take this for an entertainment value. But if you were to take a big lesson out of it, I mean, I'll leave you all to deduce your own what you learned from the story, down to you all, rather than me just kind of imposing any thoughts on it. But hopefully you enjoyed it, and inshallah I'll be uploading more videos, more stories. So smash that subscribe button, smash that bell button, like, share, subscribe, and even comment in the bottom. Just tell me, what do you think about the story? Did you learn anything actually? If you did, enlighten me. I'd love to hear that. Until I see you all next time, take care. Assalamu alaikum.